Okay, Banner AR, Due Diligence 101. So this is a Due Diligence 101 class. So I am not going to be walking you all through exact steps that you need to do for billing processes. I hope that at your college you have a baseline standard of what you've been doing for due diligence over the years. And so you can kind of look at what you have, and then you can kind of make some adjustments based on what you're seeing. I am going to offer two strategies at the end, and they're two strategies that one works off of mainly a bill date, and the other one works off of just finding people who still owe a balance. But we'll talk about all of that kind of stuff. We'll go through some strategies at the end, and then I do have some letter samples that I have borrowed from a couple of our sister colleges that have been willing to share their due diligence processes with me, and so I'll show those in case you're a college that would like some adjustment to your letters, things like that, to know what it means when you have a more strongly worded letter. So all of that stuff we'll kind of show at the end. And if you have a due diligence process that I'm not showing today that you think works wonderfully that you would be willing to share, I am always very happy to accept that, because what works for one college may work for 5 more colleges. So we're always willing to share what you guys are doing with due diligence. So what is due diligence? So due diligence can mean several things, right? If you go to the dictionary and you look up due diligence, it's something along the lines of making sure that you are doing your due processing when you're checking out clients or when you're checking out certain things or accounts. But for us, due diligence comes under the billing area. So due diligence for us means that we are billing our students to do our due diligence to collect on the debt that the student owes to your college. So that's essentially what it is. The state accounting office says, hey, you have to do due diligence to try to collect outstanding balances from your colleges. So due diligence for us is simply just making sure that we are billing our students based on the policy that we have created, and that we follow our policy in billing our students and making sure we're trying to collect on debts. Why do we do certain things that we do? I know some of you that are probably new, that have never done due diligence before, are probably like, why do we only have to send 2 letters? Or why do we have to send 3 letters? And why does the 3rd letter have to be certified with a return receipt, right? Those are things that we do because of our due diligence policy that we have, that each college follows. Our due diligence policy falls under the accounting procedures, not necessarily banner procedures, but we do have banner procedures for those. But it mainly falls under the accounting procedures for the Technical College System of Georgia. So I talk a lot about our intranet. So on my screen right now, you are looking at the intranet. So the site is intranet.tcsg.edu. And this is where we have all of our documentation. This is where we have all of our procedures for banner. It's where we have our banner matrix, but it's also where we have our accounting procedures. And if you've never went to the site and paid attention to that, today's the day that you get to see at least one item from the accounting procedures section. So if you come to the intranet at tcsg.edu, we fall under the admin services area because we are more of the accounting side. So we fall under admin services. So if you click on admin services and then you go to the accounting section, this is where we live, right? So most of us live here. There's a little menu over here that will jump to the area that you need to jump to. So if you click on Banner Online Training, you're going to jump all the way down to the bottom. And then here is our training library, right? So this is all of our links to our videos and all of the documentation that we've provided for you all, for all of the ones that we have done, right? So if you want to jump back up to the top, you click that arrow and you jump back up to the top. But today we're going to focus on some accounting procedures. No, we're not. We're going to focus on this part right here. these are our accounting procedures. The accounting procedures we might need to adjust. But I guess it falls under starting all the way down. So these are accounting procedures. There's a bunch of them. They go on about everything. But today we're going to focus on this one right here, our due diligence accounting procedure. So when you click on these, what they do is they automatically download to however you guys have your information set up to download to in your browser. So they're all different, but it's just how you do it. And this is our due diligence policy for the Technical College System of Georgia. So when you have an audit and the auditors ask you, are you following your policy for due diligence? This is the policy that most colleges are going to look at. Some colleges do have their own procedure that ties back to this procedure, but for the most part, everybody is going to fall under this due diligence procedure. And it just talks about how it's the practice of collecting debt. It goes into some of the information that you need, which this is not something that we need anymore, but we haven't updated the policy in a minute. So we're going to mainly focus on these two sections right here today. The first one is the collection activity, and the second one is student letters with a third party not involved. Third party meaning a collection agency. So the reason why we do 2 billings if you use a collection agency and 3 billings if you do student letters only is this policy right here, right? This one says a minimum of 2 letters shall be sent if a collection agency is used, right? If a collection agency is not used, then at least 3 letters shall be submitted to the debtor, and the third letter will be sent with certified mail with return receipt requested, right? So then it goes on to say each letter should be worded stronger than the previous, and if a magistrate court is used, which I think I only know one college that's used a magistrate court in the past, but I could be wrong. If a magistrate court is used, then the guidelines established by your local magistrate court also must be followed, which we don't know what the local rules are for your magistrate court, so you would have to find out what those were. So that is why we do 2 billings if you use a collection agency and 3 billings with a certified letter being the last one with a return receipt requested if you don't use a collection agency. If you are a college that is not using a collection agency, I would ask you to take a look at why you're not using a collection agency. I know some people said, oh, we don't want it to go on their credit. Oh, we don't, I get that. But at the same time, here's a little bit of extra that a collection agency can offer you, right? So if you're using a collection agency, you only have to send 2 letters to your students. So after your drop add period ends and your financial aid dust has settled, right? You've done your refunds. If you still have students that owe a balance, run your letter, send out your letter, right? Then wait your 10-day period, do it again, and then you're done. Then all you have to do is run your collection process and you send it to the collection agency. Then guess what? They do extra work on your behalf that you don't have to worry about anymore because they're calling the students. They're sending letters to the students. They're doing all different kinds of things that now you don't have to do that's reminding your student, hey, you have a balance. Hey, you have a balance. Hey, you have a balance, right? And so that not only gets extra work done on your behalf, but it also may spur the student to actually pay the balance that they owe to your college, right? So if you're not using a collection agency, talk to your leadership and ask them, is there certain reasons why you're not using a collection agency? I think you'll find that using one is not as bad as what you think it is, especially with Williams & Fudge. They make it super simple for us. Williams & Fudge is our statewide contract for our collection agencies that we use. And Williams & Fudge only charges you if they collect on the debt. So if you send them a student that owes $1,000 and they don't collect anything on the debt, then you don't owe Williams & Fudge anything. And hopefully the student will come and pay. If not, then you've done your due diligence for the student to to notify the student that they had a debt and try to collect on that debt. And then you can send those students to SAO to request them to be written off and write them off, and then you have a balance that's not on your books anymore, right? Now, if Williams & Fudge does collect, they will collect either a 13% of whatever they collect or 25% of whatever they collect. I know you're sitting there going, why is it 13 or why is it 25? Well, we had a contract with them. Our contract through TCSG was that they would take 25% of whatever they collect. Then we piggybacked onto the Board of Regents College system-wide contract with them, and the Board of Regents had negotiated a 13% fee. So now we have a 13% collection rate. However, if you placed the student with Williams & Fudge while we were still on the 25% contract, Williams & Fudge is going to take the 25% because that's what we agreed to when we sent the student. If you have sent a student after we have been on the new contract, which I think went into place June of last year, I think. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. But if you place anybody since we went on the new contract, then you would only be charged 13%. So, and they take that off before they send you the amount, and so they only send you the amount that you're going to put onto the student's account. Sure, that leaves a balance on the student's account, but if the student, if the student was charged, if we sent a $1,000 balance over there and you take 13% of that, you're only writing off 13% of what's left on the student's balance instead of the full $1,000. So either way, you're coming out on top because you're getting extra work done on your behalf. They're only taking money out when they collect, and then you're writing off a smaller amount when it comes to your year-end time, right? So for your third-party not involved student letters, you are having to collect that extra letter. You're having to write that extra letter. It has to be certified. It should have a return receipt because that is our policy, right? And then you're having to pay the certified letter fee, which I looked that up. That does fall between $5 and $9. It was very confusing. USPS Postal Service as to what you're actually going to get charged when you send a certified letter, but I want to say it's closer around $8, at least $8, $9, I think is what you're getting charged per letter that you send out certified mail. So, and it's extra work. You have to do a third letter, and you don't get any other touching of that student balance. So you don't get, the collection agency is not doing phone calls and letters on your behalf in order to try to collect behind the scenes. So I really think if you're not using a collection agency, you should very, very much be looking out for it. And Williams & Fudge also keeps on top of any of the federal changes and federal guidelines and legalities that we need to know, and they let us know those things, and they follow the legal line to the letter. And so we will be less likely to be sued and all that kind of stuff. So if that is part of what your leadership is worried about, since I've been here, we've never been sued, and as far as I know, before that, we've never been sued for trying to collect on a student debt. So this is our policy. It gives you like dates. It gives you when you should be sending it right, but it also says that each letter should be worded stronger than the previous letter. And the minimum bottom line of that is each letter should just be a little bit strongly worded. It doesn't have to scare the pants off of them, right? It just has to say, your first letter could say, our records show that you owe a debt, right? Your second letter could just say, second notice, and then say, our records show that you have a balance on your account, right? And then if you're sending the third letter, then it would be third notice, our records show. So it doesn't have to be a crazy different letter every time. It could just simply be second notice, because second notice is letting them know, hey, we've already sent you a letter one time. It's a little more strongly worded on there. So it doesn't have to be crazy. It could just be a little bit a few words just makes a big difference. And then in here, it just simply says things that just make sense. The more rapid a debtor is notified of their outstanding balance, the less likely they are to default, right? So if you are a college that doesn't bill quarterly, you might want to think about doing that. I know it's more work. I understand that you guys already have more work than you know what to do with, and I get that. But if you wait, a whole semester, or if you wait 2 semesters, or if you wait till year end to do all of your billing, you're going to have more students that are like, I didn't know I had a balance. I'm not paying that. They waited all this time to send me a letter. I mean, I say that when I get notices from doctors' offices and things like that have waited 3 months, 4 months, 5 months to bill me. And I'm like, really? Y'all couldn't have billed me before then? But at the same time, I look at it from our side, where I understand we have way more work in a day than we have time on most days. And so I understand that. But the faster you notify them that they have a debt, the more likely they are to act on it. That's why we say do your early term bills. And then, as soon as the dust settles on drop add and financial aid, make sure that you're billing your students. The recommendation here is that you bill your students no later than 30 days. And this is saying after the last day of the term. I probably would do it during the term. Once the dust settles on the financial aid, because again, the faster you notify them of debt, the more likely they are to pay. And then, so this says 30 days after the last day of the term, and then you should allow the debtor up to 30 days to satisfy the debt. If the initial letter doesn't result in payment, the more strongly worded second letter should be advised, and then tell them that they have 15 days to bring their account up to current. The recommendation is 30 days. You don't have to do 30 days. Most colleges are doing 10 days, right? So they're sending out their letters and they're saying, you have 10 days to pay this balance. They send out a second letter, you have 10 days to pay this balance, So that's perfectly fine because it says it is recommended. So it's not, you're going to bill them every 30 days, blah, blah, blah. So that's just a recommendation as to a time frame if you guys don't have a set time frame that you already have worked out with your agency, right? So billing during the semester, don't quote me on this. I know for sure this one college bills their students, sends them to collections, and writes off on a quarterly basis, right, or on a semester basis. So this college does all of their steps, and then at year end, the only thing they're writing off is their last semester when they've done their due diligence and write-off. That is okay. You do not have to wait till year end to do your write-offs. Most people do because it's a lot of work. Again, you have to send everybody to SAO. You have to get approval for that before you can do write-offs. It's a lot of steps, but I think I only have one college that does it all on a semester basis. But you can do that. But also keep in mind when you are holding on to your write-offs until year end, you have the possibility of picking these students up on your due diligence reporting over and over and over and over again, semester after semester after semester, because your due diligence picks up people that has a balance. Generally, you are picking up people's balance on a less than or equal to whatever term you're billing for basis. So you are going to pick these people up over and over and over again in your billing processes because they still have a balance, right? But if you write them off, they no longer have balance. So it does help to do all of that in one semester to get rid of the people that you don't want to continually bill because you've already written them off. I won't get too far into the write-off processes and what happens when you write off a student and they come back and pay, because we will talk about that in write-offs, which is not the next training session, but the one after that, closer toward the end of May. So how often you bill and when you bill, that is right here in this letter. The recommendation is no later than 30 days after the last day of the term, but as a college, you can choose to do that sooner, right? You can do that as soon as the dust settles on financial aid, you can do that, and then you can wait 10 days and bill them again, and then send them to collections, and then you're done with your due diligence for this term, right? We do have ways to find out who has had no letters sent, who has had one letter sent, who has had 2 letters sent. That is going to come in the strategy section at the end. I'll talk about that a little bit. So there's a lot of moving parts when we come to billing. So if you haven't read over this, go ahead and read over, the policies and have it in place. You do have to keep a letter, and here is that portion of, before we move on to all the billing parts. You do have to keep letters. You keep copies of your correspondence letters to your debtor. The auditors have asked to see specific letters that were sent to students and looked at the way that they were worded and what charges were placed on those letters when they have done financial audits at colleges in the past. So make sure you are keeping your copies. If you are the person that does the billing, I do not suggest that you keep these due diligence copies on your local PC, because one, what happens when you get a new PC and you forget that you had the due diligence letters on there, and then they get deleted and you can't get them back? What happens if you decide you don't want to work at the college anymore? The people that are still there need to have access to those collection debt letters. So if your area does not have a shared drive or something like that, like we have a shared drive here. Tracy and I have a shared drive where we keep all of our documentation, all of the things that we do for you guys. We keep all of that stuff on a shared drive. If you do not have a shared drive that everybody in your department has access to, you need to talk to your local IT people and get that set up and going, because that is the ideal place to store the copies of the correspondence for your debt letters, because then everybody in your area has access to them. And if you decide that you're going to leave the college, or if you're out on a surgery for months, or if they just can't get in touch with you and the auditors are there asking for copies of these letters, then somebody else in your area will have access to those letters, and they're generally backed up by your IT department. But that is a question you need to ask them: is this shared drive backed up? If it's not, then someone in your office needs to be responsible for backing that up, but most of the time they are. So copies of those correspondence letters must be maintained and made available to the auditors if they ask, and they have been asked for those in the past, right? So let me talk about one more thing before we leave the policy. So our policy, our SAO policy, says that a student that has a balance greater than $3,000 cannot be written off, period. You are stuck with that $3,000 balance sitting on your account for the rest of your life unless the student comes back and pays that $3,000 down. So another reason to be timely on your billing is if you are timely on your billing, that means you are timely on placing students on hold because you have sent them a letter saying they owe a balance and you have put them on hold, right? That is key to this process. You can't just send a student a debt letter and not do anything with it. You have to put them on hold. Putting them on hold keeps them from getting registered for the next term. I used to say it keeps them from getting transcripts to go to another college and for registering for a new one, but come July 1st, it is looking like we're no longer going to be able to do transcript holds. So it will keep a student from registering for the next semester and thus running up a balance that totals up to $3,000, and then we can't write them off, right? So if you're writing them off by term, you're never allowing them to get to that $3,000 threshold where you can't write them off. And if you're billing them and at least putting them on hold to where they can't register for the next term, at least you're not allowing them to run up the balance to $3,000. So I know that is very difficult for colleges who are registering for 2 and 3 and up to a year in advance. We do have a couple of colleges that are doing a year in advance. It's super tough for those colleges because they have to bill and they have to put students on hold, but that student may already be registered for the next 2 semesters, right? That is what it is. I don't know of a great way to help you on that other than to just tell you the earlier you bill, the better off you are. I don't know how to handle those students that have registered in advance, other than knowing that you sent them, which may be a manual process, tracking those that you have sent a due diligence to, and then making sure that those students don't get, their schedule doesn't get saved, so that when the purge is ran, they will get purged. But it would be a very intense manual process to track those people. So I'm going to pause right here just to make sure we don't have any questions so far on the policy portion. Again, if you haven't seen this policy, go to the internet and read over it, and then you can print out a copy if you need to for your records. Okay, so now we're going to get into billing parts and how they work with each other and other processes. Okay, so billing parts. So there are a lot of different banner processes and procedures that we use when we run bills. We use population selections. We use letter generation. And I know if you're new, you're probably going, I don't know what a population selection is, and I don't know what a letter generation is. Well, let me tell you a little bit about population selections and letter generation. We are going to do a population selection class later in the year. Population selections are a bit overwhelming, and it's kind of one of those things where you just have to get in there and go a little ham and be like, I'm a programmer and I've got it, right? Because population selections do make you write a little bit of code, but it does have little places where you click on in order to help you. So you're not like out there having to just write code from scratch, but you are having to know your criteria, right? So population selections are just that. They pull a population of students that meet the criteria that you have put into the population selection criteria area in Banner, right? So if we take a moment and we go into Banner, so I'm going to log into my Banner. And if you're not familiar with some of these screens, you probably will get more familiar with them as you write them, but GLR-SLCT is your population selection definition rules. Your application for most of your things is going to be AR because that's what area we are in. And then your selection ID is whatever you decide to name your population selection, right? So I'm going to try build underscore students. We have crazy test data. So sometimes we have good stuff and sometimes we don't yet. So let me just try to add a 2 to that just so you can kind of see what a population selection looks like. And I'm going to have horrible luck with everything. So let me just see if I can find something that may be able to. All right, let's just look at this one. Not one of your. I'll look at this one just to see. If it has anything in it at all. Oh, good. Yeah, it has some criteria. So, okay. So this one is your build students. This one's for beginning of term, which, you know, you want to do early term bills. Early term bills do not count toward due diligence. It is simply a courtesy bill that you have to send out. Now, I did verify because in our policy, it does say letter. And depending on your interpretation of the word letter, a letter could be a physical letter that you put in the mail, right, and mail it through the United States Postal Service. to your student. But in our particular case, you could also interpret a letter as an email, right? So in our policy case, you could do a letter or you could do an email, right? I know colleges are looking for ways to save money. If you have student email addresses that you know are kept up to date and that you know your students are going to get these emails, then you can email your letters, right? The only one that would have to be a physical letter would be that third letter if you're not using a collection agency, because you have to physically mail that through with a certified letter that has to have a signature and a return receipt. So you could do them either way, but the beginning of term letters are just courtesy letters and do not count toward due diligence. But on this population selection, this is build underscore students at the beginning of the term. And essentially what we're looking for is we're pulling the student's PITM. The PITM is the connector to the student's ID. So in Banner, a student has an ID, which is their 900 number or their 910 number. But behind the scenes, they also have another number that's just a random string of numbers that ties this student on just about every table that we have in Banner that has student data in it, right? So we're looking for their little PITM, their little ID, and we're looking for it from the table SACE user TBALANC, TBRECCD, TTB and SFB ETRM. And y'all are probably thinking, I don't know what those tables are. I don't know what they are. That will come with time, but let me just tell you that the TBALANC table is created when you run ZSP term. And a lot of people run ZSP term for the beginning of term bills. They do that for the beginning of term bills because ZSP term takes into consideration authorized aid and reduces the student's balance to zero if they have aid. So you're only billing students who truly have a debt if you use ZSP term. And that table created with that process is called TBALANC. TBRECCD is the table that holds the data that you see on TSAAREB. TAS Manager is the owner of these tables. TTB DETC is your detail code table that you can see that data on TSA DETC. And SFB ETRM is a registration table. You guys don't generally deal with registration tables because, except for when you're looking at certain things, right? So this in particular, you're looking at the AR indicator on the form that shows SFA REGS. So if you're familiar with SFA REGS, there's a none, confirmed, and accepted flag over on the right-hand side of the screen. This is that little indicator, right, in a table format. So what this is essentially doing is looking for the student's PITM where their term code equals whatever term code you ask them for, and their term code equals the TBALANC term code, which is the TBALANC table that's created with ZSP term, and their detail code equals a detail code that is in TBB DETC, which is TSA DETC, so that you can make sure that you don't have any crazy detail codes out there. And their type indicator for the detail code is a C for charge, because you don't want to bill for payments. You're only billing for charges. And where their AR indicator equals an N. So their AR indicator being an N means they haven't paid, right? So this is essentially pulling students that have charges that have a balance. That's essentially what you're looking at. So this here, under this section, is what we consider criteria for a population selection. So you're pulling those students that meet the criteria for those population selections. Population selections only pull student IDs. They don't pull anything else. And when you guys run letters, you know just as well as I do that you're pulling the student's ID, you're pulling the student's name, first name, last name, you're pulling the student's amount that they owe, you're pulling the description for the detail codes they owe, you're pulling the description for the term that they owe, you're pulling their address. I mean, you're pulling their email address, you're pulling all kinds of things other than the ID, right? So that right there lets you know that, hey, I am using a population selection to get my students, but I can't use a population selection to get other items. So that is where letter generation comes into play. So letter generation is a process, a set of processes in Banner that pulls items that you want for letters that you are going to create, hence the name letter generation, right? Letter generation pulls several things. It pulls all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to go deep into letter generation because I think letter generation deserves its own little class, which it will have later. So letter generation deserves its own class, but just know that population selection is what gets your students. Letter generation is what gets the information that is going to go into the letters and or emails that you are sending students for your billing processes. It all works together to make one thing, right? So it builds on itself. So there are two main processes. There's a couple of processes that are setup processes, like when you set up the actual letter and then you add the paragraph to it, and then you add variables to your paragraph. All of that is what the back-end setup of letter generation is. Not going to go into that, but I will later, right? I don't want to confuse everybody at the moment, but the two main processes that you are going to run, because hopefully your college already has billing set up to where you're just running your population selection to get your students, and then you're running GLBL cell, and then you're running GLR letter, right? So GLBL cell is the process that extracts the variables in those paragraphs that we just talked about for letter generation, right? So just think of, if you want an easy way to think of what does GLBL cell do? Oh, it extracts my variables for my letters. So it extracts the first name, the last name, the address, the email address, the amount due, the description of each individual charge that adds up to the total amount due. That is what GLBL cell pulls. So it extracts data. It gives you error messages, and those error messages should be cleaned up before you move forward in your letter generation process, right? GLBL cell is the only part of the letter generation process that you can run multiple times, okay? That's important. You can run GLBL cell as many times as you want, and it won't hurt anything. All it's doing is extracting letters, and you have to be able to do this because if you have a student who has no active addresses on file, it can't pull data for your addresses. So it's going to give you an error that says, no address error for this student. Well, you have to go back and fix that on the student and then rerun this process in order to pick up their address, right? So you have to be able to run this process multiple times, okay? So GLBL cell is your letter variable extracts. It's going to pull those variables that you're going to use for your letters or your emails when you're creating bills, okay? GLR letter is the next step in this particular process that you're going to be running. This process right here can only be ran one time. If you mess up and you have to run it a second time, you have to call me or Tracy so that we can delete some things before you run it again. GLR letter puts an entry into a form called SUAML, right? And SUAML is what controls your previous attempts. So it says, how many letters have I already sent this student, right? So every entry that you have in SUAML counts as an attempt on the student's billing cycle, right? So if you run GLR letter, it's going to put an entry out there that you billed this student, and if you ran it today, that you billed the student today. Well, then tomorrow, if you said, oh no, these letters aren't right, I'm going to have to redo them. You can't go again tomorrow and run it again and not let someone know, because tomorrow it will put an entry out there on the 17th. And now if you run it again, it's going to say, oh, this student's had 2 billings, when actually that first billing you never sent out because it wasn't correct, right? So You have to be very careful when you run GLR letter. The crazy thing with GLR letter is it does have an audit indicator on there, but the audit indicator only shows you one record, right? So not very helpful for you to make sure that, you know, every student has the correct data. However, if you took your time on GLBL cell and fixed any errors that were out there, you shouldn't have all that many errors on GLR letter, right? But GLR letter is the letter generation process that puts all of the variables into a doc file that you can use in your mail merge stuff. So all of the stuff that you extracted in GLBL cell, you put into a file in GLR letter, and then that file you use in your mail merge document. But GLR letter also puts the entry into SUAMail so that you know how many times a student has been billed, right? The important part about GLR letter is that not only does that entry say, oh, this student has been billed such and such amount of times, it also is what the collections process and the write-off process uses. It looks at the SUAMail table and says, oh, do I have entries? Do I have 2 entries out here? Nope, I only have 1. I can't send the student to collection, right? Do I have 2 entries? Oh, yes, I do have 2 entries. Yes, I can send this student to collections, right? Same thing with write-off. Does the student have 1 entry? Oh, then I can't write them off, right? But do they have 2 entries? Yes. It is the honesty policy when it comes to whether you actually send them to collections if you're only doing 2 letters, right? But again, the auditors can ask you to show them where you sent them to collections. So you have to make sure that you're doing all the correct steps and not missing any. But GLR letter is important because it does put that entry into SUAMail and GUAMail. Now, on SUAMail, if you pull up a student, I'm just going to pull up my little random. Well, I pulled her up yesterday, and she don't really have any buildings. Let's look at this. Let's look at this girl right here. See if she has some buildings. Now, SUAMail is one of those weird forms that when it comes up in query mode. So you're like, oh my gosh, they don't have anything. Well, not necessarily. It tells you that you've entered into a query. You have to press F8. So when you come into this form, you either have to press 8 or click on Go because it enters in query mode. And of course, I'm gonna pick Sue. It has nothing. Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to my girl. Even though she doesn't have the billings that I really want to show you, but you know. Okay, so I had a question in chat that does the SUAMail entry have to have the exact date that you did the billing? It doesn't have to, but if you're running your letters on, okay, say you ran your letters today, right? More than likely the date on your letter that you're printing out or emailing is going to be today's date, and the entry that is put into SUAMail is also going to be today's date. In the situation of an auditor, if I were looking as an auditor and I wanted to know, okay, I need to see the bills for the student, I'm going to look at the date on the letter, and then I'm going to look at, you know, the date. And if they ask you for your SUAMail entries, if they don't, we only give them what they ask for, right? Nothing extra. So it doesn't have to be the same date, but if the auditors ever ask you for your SUAMail entries, it would be kind of difficult to match them up if they weren't. But essentially all that you generally ask for is if you build them 3 times in the term. This SUAMail entry is strictly for us to be able to run our secondary processes that we need that need to know how many times the student has been billed. So it doesn't have to match, but if your auditors ever look for something, it would be helpful if they did match for them to look at it. Okay, so when you go into this form and you hit F8, it's going to come up and show you any entry that the student has in here. So it's not just the build entries that the student gets on here. Exception letters go in here, probation letters go in here. Any other process, like your financial aid, also uses the letter generation process. So their entries are going to be in here as well. So you want to focus on the entries where you know the names of your entries, right? So in this particular student's case, she has gotten billed at the beginning of term twice, right? And then she's gotten billed equal to term twice, right? So if you are billing a ton of students and you run GLR letter and you realize, oh no, I typed in this term wrong, or I did something wrong, or something happened that some data's missing, I need to redo it. If you call me or Tracy, we will essentially come to this form and we will write a script that deletes everything from this form in mass for you, right? But say, for instance, you're just billing a one-off student, or maybe you have 10 students, right? If you have 10 students that you're billing and you billed them incorrectly, or something didn't show up in the bills correct and you need to rerun GLR letter, you can come here in SUAMail. And if you only have 10 students, it's actually faster for you to delete them than it is for us to delete them, right? So this form you can delete from. All you do is find the entry. Say, for example, I want to delete this entry. Find this entry that you want to delete and click the delete key and hit F10. And it will delete any entry you want to from that student. So you don't always have to call us. Now, if it's 100 students, or even if it's 60 students, that will take you some time to delete. If it's 10, I would probably ask you how many students it is. If you say 10, I'm going to say, why don't you go to SUAMail for each student and just delete that entry, because it would take longer for me to write the script than it would for you to delete it. But if you have 60 or 70 or 300, right, it would be faster for me or Tracy to delete that data for you. So just call us. It's not the end of the world if something happens and you have to rerun GLR later. But just know that when you run GLR later, it puts an entry into this table right here. Now, that is used later on, so it is very important. But it's not to say that we can't clean it up. But one thing not to do on GLR later is run it, like say today you ran it and you figured out the data was incorrect. And then you fix the data and you go ahead and run it again today and then call me and tell me you need me to delete the entries. I can't do that, because the only difference is that I have when I'm cleaning up is a date difference, right? Because all this data is exactly the same. The only thing that's different will be the date. So if you run it twice, I can only delete by date. I would have to delete everything on that date and you'd have to start over again, right? So call me or Tracy before you run GLR later again, or wait till the next day and then say, okay, Angela, I need you to go and delete the entries I did on the 16th. I reran them on the 17th and everything. Those are fine, but the 16th are wrong, right? So just keep that in mind, that if you run it multiple times in one day, I can't isolate one run from another, okay? Okay, all right. All right, and then GUAMail. So GUAMail is a little bit different than SUAMail, but it holds the same data. It's just in a little bit of a different format. You can see all of the same things. You can scroll through the letters that this student has, right? All of the records. You can scroll through them, but it just shows it all on one screen. Now, what's the one thing that you notice on this screen? Well, there's two things that you should notice on this screen. The first one is the third letter in the name of the form, GUIMAIL, right? So GUI means that it is an inquiry form. That's a hard word for me to say. So you can only look on this form. You cannot delete. So if you go to GUI, if you go to GUIMAIL, GUIMAIL, and you try to delete something from here, your delete option is not available because it is an inquiry-only form, right? If you want to delete, you have to go to SUAMail, right? So just kind of wanted to point that out, that you can see the same data, just in a different format. So if you have people who need to look at things, they don't need to delete things. You can give them access to GUML and not access to SUML. So just so that you know. Okay, so population selections, get your students. Letter generation gets the data that you're going to put into the letters for said students that you pulled earlier, right, with your population selection. We went through what letter generation process you can run multiple times, GLBL cell, what letter generation process can only be ran once without issues, GLR letter, and then what letter generation process places the letter attempt on the student's account, GLR letter, right? The more you know about these processes, I feel like the more you can troubleshoot when you're running your letters, because if you don't know anything about it and you have an issue, you tend to not know what to do. So I always say the more you know, and when I say the more you know, I don't know if, I don't know how many of you grew up like you were a kid in the 90s and the more you know with the star that came across it showed up on the screen on like Saturday morning cartoons and stuff. But anyway, I did. So that when I say the more you know, I think of that star going do 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 do. Right. So okay, two billing strategies for your colleges. So I will say this: these are billing strategies only that I've borrowed from other colleges that seem to work for that college. If you have a current working billing strategy that your college uses, you do not have to use these billing strategies. That's just what they are, strategies. If you have a billing, if your billing for your college is working grand for you, leave it alone, right? If it's not working so great, maybe look over a couple of these strategies and see if maybe one of them might be something that would be usable for your college, right? So let's look at the first strategy. So the first strategy that I'm going to show you, I borrowed from, I think I borrowed it from Southern Regional, if I'm not mistaken. So we have this, we'll put it up on the website and I'll send it out with the email with the recording for this so that you guys can have it to look over it. But when you're performing due diligence for this one goes into a little bit more in depth. So your process doesn't have to be crazy hard, and it doesn't have to be crazy simple. You can have a little bit harder process, or you can have a super simple due diligence process. It doesn't have to be crazy, but it can be simple. This one is a little bit more in depth than the second one that I'm going to show you. So this is the first one. There is some one-time setup on the first 4 pages of this one. I'm not going to go into huge details on that. If you want to use one of these strategies, then you can get in touch with Tracy and I, and we can go into great depth on these, but I'm just going to kind of talk about what each of these does. This right here is just an entry in GTVS DAX because there are limitations in what you can do in population selections. So what we do here is we essentially set up an entry in GTVS DAX with an external code of 0 that allows us to use this amount 1 field as a part of the criteria of the population selection that's essentially saying, and the balance is greater than 0, right? So that's essentially what this comparison field is saying. You don't have to know all that, but I'm just kind of explaining that to you. The maximum general student, which is your SGB STDN student. So a lot of times we need to know some information on their maximum general student record because they can have multiple general student records because if they change majors, right, they're going to get a new general student record. Well, you don't want to look at the wrong record. You want to make sure you're looking at the most recent general student record, and this population select or this variable pulls that for you. Your other variable is going to be your previous billings. Previous billings is important because we use that to know who's getting their first letter, who's getting their second letter, right? Who's getting their third letter. And this one is a variable, and you were using the GURML, which GURML for that table, in case you wanted to tie that back to something, the GURML table is what you see, the data you see on SUAMAIL, the SUAMAIL. So it's that data. So in this particular one, we're matching the student's PITM where their letter code is build_students, and they have an activity date that's greater than or equal to the last date since billing. And in this particular billing process, you have to keep track of the date that you last billed, and then you're going to use the day before that, right? So if I billed, like this example, if I billed on March the 16th of 2017, I would use March the 15th as my date since last billing when I'm prompted to enter that, okay? All this, again, is just the one-time setup. It could already be done at your college if this is how your college does your billing at this moment. Then you have your population selections that you set up. This is your build_students_since population selection. And what this essentially does is it pulls your students that have had any type of activity on TBRE-CCD, which is TASREV, since the date of your last billing, okay? This one excludes high school students, and the G students have changed, and I don't remember what those are, but this excludes high school students and G students. If you wanted to build your G students, or if you wanted to build your high school students, you could take this line out altogether. Or if you just wanted to bill your high school students, you would just remove the G and the comma, right? From everything from the comma over, and the parentheses. Okay, so that one is your build student since. Anybody who's had an activity since your last billing date. This one is build students to. In this particular case, this is finding students whose bill date, so this is using a bill date, whose bill date is either greater than the date since the last billing or it's null. If it's null, that means the student has never been billed for that particular charge, if that's, you know, what you're looking for. So, and then what we do is we put all of these together. We have an amount, so this is just getting your billing amount and the description for what you're billing them for. And then this one is just getting their total balance. This one gets your previous attempts, again, since your last date of billing. And then this shows you how to set up your letter. I'm not going to go into depth on that. I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of a billing strategy. So this billing strategy pretty much says when you run GLB data, I'm going to take my build_student since, any student that's pulled from there, which was the ones that had any activity since the last billing date, and I'm going to bump that against my build_students to, which said, hey, my bill date was greater than my statement date, or my bill date is null, so they haven't been billed. And if I'm going to union those together, okay, union means if they are in both population selections, if I remember this correctly, if they are in both population selections, they will be pulled into a new population selection called build_students. And build_students is the population selection that will contain your students that you are going to bill for, right? So that's kind of how that process works. It pulls those students, and then you do the same steps that you would normally do. You run GLBL cell to extract your variables. You run GLR letter to put the entry into SUAMAIL and to put those variables that you extracted into a doc form so that you can use them in your mail merge, right? The important thing to remember for previous attempts, and this previous attempts is used for both this billing strategy and the next one that I'm going to show you, is if the value of the previous attempts field is null, then that means this is the first time the student is being billed. So those will be your first time letters. If the value in that field is a 1, this is the second time that they're going to be billed. So these will be your second letters. And if you don't use a collection agency, if that previous attempts field is a 2, then this will be their third letter. And that will be the one that you send certified with a return receipt. And if they don't have a 1, a 2, or 3, then we don't care. We've already billed them their number of times, and we don't need to bill them again. That's just a waste of time and money if we build those students. So that previous temps variable is what you're going to use when you're doing your mail merge wizard, right? So it's going to, when you do your mail merge wizard and you pull your spreadsheet of students and variables into it, there's a filter option. And that will be where you select which ones you're doing which letter for. So, and then in this process, you have to run one extra step, and that is ZFRROLL, which is ZFR roll. And what that does is it runs and puts the bill date, due date, and statement date on those charges that you just billed so that you can use them in the population selections that we used above. If you remember, the build underscore students 2, we go back to this one, that one used the bill date, right? So we use ZFR roll to fill in the bill date for us and set that for us. So that is one billing strategy. It uses multiple things and it uses the build since your last bill date, right? Again, that is not going to stop a student that still owes a balance that hasn't paid it off and hasn't been written off from showing up in here. They are going to continue to show up, but we're only going to worry about those that need their first bill, their second bill, and or their third bill, right? And so that one kind of does that. Then this process goes into your TGP hold process. So this hold process, you'll just use that build underscore students population selection. You should have a hold rule set up if you've used TGP hold in the past. And this mass applies your holds after you do your billing cycle, right? And again, we talked about how important holds are when it comes to, especially registration, since we're probably losing the ability to hold their transcripts. The only way for us to possibly get money back or to at least stop them from running up large bills is going to be to put them on hold. And so it's just super important to do that, and you can do that in mass mode instead of having to do that. And then this one goes on to let you know that within a week or so, you can use the build underscore students population selection to send these students to collections. And then after that, you can use that same pop cell in ZFR write if you wanted to write off students within the same semester or shortly after a semester. If you wait till year end, then you wouldn't use that for ZFR write, but you would use it for ZSP CLLC. Because I would suggest that you go ahead and send them to collections within the same term. But, you know, okay, so that is one strategy. Our second strategy, I borrowed from Savannah Tech. They were nice enough to let me borrow that, and I'm trying to pull that up. I thought I already had it open, and apparently I don't. So for Savannah, they do theirs very similar to the process that I just showed you. The only difference with Savannah is they don't use two population selections. They don't use two population selections. They use one population selection called build underscore students, and they just look for any student that has a balance greater than 0 for a term that's less than or equal to whatever term they're entering in, and then they put their information using that one population selection. So we'll look at, so this is how they kind of do it. So for them, they use build underscore students 1 and build students 2. So what they do is they take build underscore students 1, which has no high school students, right? And then they have build underscore 2 that has bankruptcy students in it. And they minus out the bankruptcy students and the high school students, right? So they're minusing them out. So this one pulls all of their students that owe a balance, and then this one pulls their bankruptcy students. And so their bankruptcy students are subtracted out of these and then put into this population selection. So you want to be really careful when you have bankruptcy students that you don't send them a bill, because we're not allowed to bill them. So that's kind of how Savannah does theirs. They exclude that. So then when they run that, in this particular case, they pulled 267 students. This is their parameter set when they're minusing those out, and it's showing that you get prompted for the term. So you go over here and enter in the term, and then they have their students. If you have particular students here after you run GLB data that you don't want to bill for some specific reason, you can delete them by going to GLA, not GLI, but GLA-EXTR, and delete the student out before you run GLBL cell and GLR letter, right? So you can minus those students out, and then you're going to get your letter generation. This is GLBL cell. And then down here, I want you to look at this. The following persons do not meet the address criteria and will not get a letter. This is what I was talking about, where if you had some sort of issue with the address and you had to correct that issue and then go back and run GLBL cell again. That's why GLBL cell is able to be run multiple times, is because you have to make sure that you're cleaning up all of these issues that show up down here. So it says letters inserted, IDs not processed is 8, right? And so you normally want that to say 0. So if you have IDs not processed of 0, then that means you don't have any errors that are preventing the letter from being created. But if you have anything down here in this didn't meet the following criteria for such and such variable, you want to at least look at it and make sure that you're cleaning it up if it needs to be cleaned up. So then they just kind of go through and give you the steps to clean up address errors, things like that. And then they run GLR letter. GLR letter is going to produce the doc file, which looks very similar to this. And there it is in its full glory when they ran it in update mode. So it just has your students' addresses, first name, last name, your introduction, tuition, previous attempts, all of that stuff is in there. And then this is where I was kind of talking about the previous attempts. So there's that query when you come into your mail merge, and you're going to do a filter, and then you're essentially going to say where the previous attempts is blank. That means it's null, which means that's their first letter. So if you have your first letter template pulled up and you do previous attempts as blank, then anybody that needs to get their first letter is going to be put into your mail merge there. So use your mail merge as a way to only send letters to the students that you need to send them to. So, for example, they had 267 students that got pulled, but they may only have 30 students that are getting their first letter, right? So it kind of goes that way. And then their next, if you're doing letter 2, your previous attempts would be equal to 1. Right? So that means I'm sending them the second letter. And then for Savannah, they don't use a collection agency at the moment, and their previous attempts is equal to 2, which would give them their certified letter that they have to send out, and they send those out for anybody with a balance greater than $100, right? And then any remaining, so if they have greater than 3, these are the remaining students. You do not have to bill those students. You've already billed them the number of times you need to bill them. If they've been billed more than, well, if you're a collection agency, if it's more than 2, you don't have to bill them again. And if you're not using a collection agency, if it's more than 3, you don't have to bill them again. There's no sense in it. If they haven't responded to your first 2 to 3 letters, they're not going to respond. It would be time to send them to collections if you send them to collections, or write them off. Okay, letter examples. So this is an example of a letter. This is their letter template that they use at Savannah. This is the school's address. They print theirs out on a like a check stock type thing. It's not check stock, but it's the same type thing where it's the fold and seal paper. That's what Savannah sends theirs on. And so they have their return address, the student's first name, last name, address, CSA zip. You have to manually change this date here. They have the intro, which is dear, like for me, if I was getting this letter, it would be like, Dear Angela, right? That's what that intro would say. Our records show you have a past term balance of, let's say I owe $1,000. And then it tells you where to submit your information to. Since Savannah has changed their letter and added a little bit more definition down here to people to contact, but this is a copy of one of their older letters. And then the ARS amount is, so say I owed $1,000, say I owed $500 in tuition, and let's just say I owed a $500 supply fee, right? So it would be tuition charge for spring 2024 or whatever, and then it would say $500. And the same thing with the supply fee for spring of 2024. It lists out what term you're actually billing for, because we're billing for less than or equal to terms. So it says, you know, tuition charge for the spring 2024 term, right? So, and then the next entry may be $75 ACT or activity fee charge for fall of 2024, right? So it can be multiple semesters on this one letter, but because we have them listed out by day, by amount and description and term, then that meets the auditor's requirements so that they can see how many times we specifically billed this particular charge for this particular semester, right? So they could look on that letter and say, oh, well, they got billed 3 times for this spring of 2024 tuition charge, right? So that description and the amount, the description and the term being here helps tremendously when it comes to your auditors knowing that you've billed 3 times for this, okay? So that's one set of letter examples that I have. So let's look at one other set of letters that I have. Theirs are essentially, no, this is Oconee Fall Line. Oconee Fall Line was nice enough to let me borrow some of their letters. Let's say no to that. Okay, so this one has the same type thing: first name, last name, ID, the student's full name. In this case, they did a combined one, so that would be Angela White. Our records show you have a past due balance of blah, right? And that would be filled in with the data from your file. A hold's going to be put on your account. And then again, this college does the same thing with the AR detail, where it says the amount, the description of the amount, and the term that the amount is due, so that we can meet the criteria for what the auditors want. This is a copy of their second one, their second letter, and the only difference is they changed the wording to say second notice, and then they say our records show that you have a past due balance. So your letters can be just that, adding that second notice and a past due balance instead of saying our records show you have a balance, right? So now you have a past due balance. It's a little bit strongly worded, and then it breaks it down again so that we can make sure that we are covering ourselves for billing that particular charge 3 times or 2 times or however many times we have to, bill based on our college. And then the third one for them is just the same thing. The only difference, I think this is it. The only difference in that is it has past due third notice, and it says your account is extremely past due. So a little bit stronger wording. If your college needs any of these examples to help you with your wording and changing out your template if you want to make your template a little bit stronger worded. Then you can give me a email, and me or Tracy will be glad to share these. And the colleges, I've asked the colleges if it's okay for me to share them, and they were gracious enough to allow me to share it. So again, if you have one that you would like to share, please let me know. So I'm going to take a second and stop the recording.